Hello, everybody. Chloethedev here. Just continuing with the Nightshade protocol or consensus protocol paper review. Going to be starting from chapter 3, where we're going through the Nightshade protocol specifically. The first two chapters were just background, honestly. So the first video I did was two videos so far. The first video was just background on sharding and all that kind of stuff. The second video I did yesterday started getting into Nightshade, so I'll be jumping into the middle here. So you should probably watch yesterday's video first. This should be about hopefully an hour, just quickly going through the last bit of the Nightshade paper. Sorry, I have my oatmeal here, so I'll try not to slurp. I know it comes up loud on the microphone, but yeah, I'm just gonna jump right into it. So we're talking about fishermen. They're kind of like watchtowers in the near system, and fast cross shard transactions. So we're talking about you're trying to send a transaction from one shard to another, and so obviously it can't happen synchronously. It has to happen asynchronously. So the transaction happens in in one block, in on shard number one in block A, and then in block B in shard number two. So or in the next block. So as discussed in section 2.3, once we assume that the shard chunks or shard blocks in the model with shard chains can be invalid and introduce a challenge period, it negatively affects the finality and thus cross-shard communication. In particular, the destination shard of any cross-shard transaction cannot be certain the originating shard chunk or block is final until the child period is over. It's just saying that now that we understand that we need to actually look out for potential malicious nodes, we need to make sure that this challenge period ends before we do much, which kind of adds extra communication overhead. And this is just a figure explaining waiting for a challenge period before applying the receipts. You need to wait before the challenge period's over. And once, okay, you know what, no one said anything's wrong with this, then you can continue because you don't have all the information. The way to address it in a way that makes the cross-shard transaction instantaneous is for the destination shard to not wait for the challenge period after the source shard transaction is published and apply the receipt transaction immediately, but then roll back the destination shard together with the source shard if later the originating chunk or block was found to be invalid. So this is saying, okay, like in Ethereum, I think it goes through the transaction. If any part of the transaction is valid, it doesn't work. What this is saying, okay, you know what, do the transaction. And then if throughout the challenge period, you're still waiting to see, and then you might have to revert something after. So then you would still need some sort of again, you have justification and finality. So you might have stuff that's justified, but in this system, justification doesn't seem to give you much security because it seems like they're going to execute state transitions in shards before the source is published, right? And then roll back stuff after. So if you're a merchant, that could cause you issues, obviously, and you'd want to change that. Oops, I realized I have my screen too large. Sorry. It's just on the wrong side because the OBS screen is wrong. Let me fix that. Sorry. You know what? This is good enough. Okay. So we're going to roll it back later. So this applies very naturally to the Nightshade design in which the shard chains are not independent, but instead the shard chunks are all published together in the same main chain block. Makes sense? You're not rolling back each chain individually. You're just rolling back a certain segment of state in certain shards. If any chunk is found to be invalid, the entire block with that chunk is considered invalid and all the blocks built on top of it. So basically, so if one piece of data in one block is invalid, then all blocks on top of it are invalid. And so you really do have some sort of like revert back. So you can still build on top of something and keep justifying blocks, let's say, and building on top. But there's no finality there. And it shows that very clearly, I suppose. Both of the above approaches provide atomicity, assuming that the challenge period is sufficiently long. So they're saying that you could have this atomic or synchronous swapping of data or state, I suppose, on two different shards. But then you have to wait for a challenge period before that data becomes arguably useful. And I would assume the longer you wait, the more useful that data is. So like even in Ethereum, you wait, 12 confirmations or whatever it is, 6 confirmations. And the longer you wait, the more the proof of work, the more valid the state should be. But in this, depending on how long that challenge period is, that could be a week, is it a month, is it a day, an hour? Like it's very difficult to know unless you have some actual data there. We use the latter approach since providing fast cross-shard transactions under normal circumstances outweighs the inconvenience of the destination shard rolling back due to an invalid state transition in one of the source shards, which is an extremely rare event. So again, I would consider this taking usability over security. Not that it's a bad thing, but I think it's not a bad. Not okay. It's a reasonable. What's it called? Decision to make. Let's put it that way, for lack of better words. 3.7.3, hiding validators. The existence of the challenges already sufficiently reduces the probability of adaptive corruption. Since to finalize a chunk with an invalid state transition post, and we have a lot of diagrams. I'll read first and go back up to the diagrams. Post the challenge period, the adaptive adversary needs to corrupt all the participants that maintain the state of the shard, including all the validators. That seems quite difficult, but for only one shard, arguably. Estimating the likelihood of such an event is extremely complex. Sorry. True. Since no sharded blockchain has been live sufficiently long for any such attack to be attempted. And this is where I'm excited for the beacon chain launch, most importantly, because I know this sounds weird, but like I would love to try and hack the beacon chain. More like fuzz testing or, all that kind of stuff. But as a security researcher, in my opinion, it's important to know that these things are secure. And the only way to know they're secure is to run them and have these incentivized test nets, for lack of a better word. And right now I would consider ETH2 just launched today, a beacon chain contract on ETH1, deposit contract. So yes, the contract seems secure, the chain seems secure, but there was no actual money being there's no actual economic activity on the network. There was no actual economic loss if anything happened, and so now we're going to have that. So let's just look at these diagrams real quick. So figure 22, applying receipts immediately and then rolling back the destination chain if the source chain had an invalid block. Okay, I mean, I'm not going to go into all these diagrams. We just talked about all this. Figure 23 is Fisherman challenge in Nightshade. So Fisherman makes the challenge, and we go back to the original the shard because we said, oh, these are all wrong, so everything's wrong that's built on top of it. So because there was an issue in shard 1 on block 1, all the other blocks, block 2, block 3, even for shard 2 are incorrect. Yes. Let's see. We argue that the probability, while extremely low, is still sufficiently large for a system that is expected to execute multi-million transactions and run a worldwide financial operations. I would agree. There are two main reasons for this belief. Most of the validators of the proof of stake chains and miners of the proof of work chains are primarily incentivized by financial upside. That's the way things are currently. Makes sense. If an adaptive adversary offers them more money than the expected return from operating honestly, it is reasonable to expect that many validators will accept the offer. Also, when you consider this, a lot of times nodes might not even be tuned to understand when they're being malicious or when they're being attacked or what's going on. So if you program a node to accept, the highest payments, like in Ethereum, you probably have a miner accept the highest payments. If those highest payments are DDoSing the network or whatever, then you're still going to accept them. You're still going to put them in, or some blockchain oracles being spammed or whatever. You're still going to put those transactions in. So you're actually actively helping an attacker attack a certain platform, or passively, but without knowing it. And so I think a lot of times understanding that like this financial upside is not even just someone actively knowing there's a financial upside, but just generally in our society, we live in a capitalistic society. And so economic incentives are the way we usually program things, regardless of anything else. Many entities do validation of proof of stake chains professionally, and it is expected that a large percentage of the stake in any chain will be from such entities. Make sense? The number of such entities is sufficiently small for an adaptive adversary to get to know most of them personally and have a good understanding of their inclination to be corrupted. So this is just saying, like, for example, Almeida and like CZ Binance and all these people who own all these big exchanges, they probably all know each other, right? And so if they're all talking to each other and all hanging out, one of those people might be able to attack the others, or someone might be able to infiltrate the group and attack all of them. In which case, maybe they could just take over 60% of the network in one room. If the network has $10 billion of economic activity on it, potentially someone would be, incentivized to do something like that. Who knows what this first point? People are incentivized by the financial upside. So who knows what people want to do for that financial upside? We take one step further in reducing the probability of the adaptive corruption by hiding which validators are assigned to which shard. Make sense? The idea is remotely similar to the way Algorand conceals validators. It is critical to note that even if the validators are concealed as an Algorand or described below, the adaptive corruption is still in theory possible. And I think that would make sense. For example, even if you hid which shards a validator was on, if an attacker needs only 1/3 of the network to start causing issues, or 1/3 of any given shard, for example, and they owned 10% of the network in any specific block, they might be able to own a certain percent needed to attack the network of that shard. And so it might not happen every block, but they can just wait for a certain block when they know they have what they need, check, and then maybe just try every time. But slashing should try and stop that as well. So that's kind of another potential one. Like we're going through a lot of the issues of the layering on top security. So we're getting to kind of the end now. It is critical to know that even if value is concealed, blah blah. While the adaptive adversary doesn't know the participants that will create or validate a block or chunk, the participants themselves do know that they will perform such a task and have a cryptographic proof of it. Very interesting. Thus, the adversary can broadcast their intent to corrupt and pay to any participant that will provide such a cryptographic proof. Very interesting. That's so exciting. Sorry. Anyways, we know, however, that since the adversary doesn't know the validators that are assigned to the shard they want to corrupt, they have no other choice but to broadcast their intent to corrupt a particular shard to the entire community. This just seems like, okay, but if you knew there was a small subset of people who were willing to get paid to just sign for whatever, anyways, we'll keep going. At that point, it is economically beneficial for any honest participant to spin up a full node that validates that shard, since there's a high chance of an invalid block appearing in that shard. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, sorry, keep going. Which is an opportunity to create a challenge and collect associated reward. That, to not reveal the validators that are assigned to shall we do the following. Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that personally, because if I was an attacker and I was like, okay, I want to broadcast that I want to attack this shard, why wouldn't I just use like a third-party anonymous service where I know, like, I guess what I'm saying is, if you had a really large centralized service that was willing to be a little bit corrupt for you, you'd be paying for that, like, anonymity. You'd be paying like, hey, don't leak what I'm trying to do on this shard, or with this data, but can I do it with you? And I think that's more the issue I see, is the coercion, not necessarily, some random person trying to do something bad and then broadcasting it to the world. That would be very illogical, I would agree. And then challenging would be, hopefully you'd have enough validators on all the shards that people find important to them, that if a shard was super important, there'd be a lot of validators for it. And if a shard wasn't as important, there'd be potentially less validators. But you could, yeah, anyways. Ooh. Anyways, to not reveal the validators, blah, blah, using VRF to get the assignment. At the beginning of each epoch, each validator uses a VRF to get a bit mask of the shards the validator is assigned to. The bit mask of each validator will have SW bits. What's that again? Staking weight? No, W is, anyways, it's up there. I can't remember. Yeah, definition for SW. Where are you? Here. Each block producer is assigned to SW shards. Okay, so SW. They had it outlined very well. I mean, they used anyways. Let's get back down to where we are supposed to be. Okay. Perfect. So that's how many block producers you're going to have. So that's how many bits each validator is going to have. The validator then fetches the state of the corresponding shards, and during the epoch for each block, validates the chunks that correspond to the shards the validator is assigned to. So for as many block producers as there are, they'll get a bit mask with that many bits telling them which shards they need to validate for, and they do their job. Sign-on blocks instead of chunks. So since the shards assignment is concealed, the validator cannot sign on chunks. Instead, it always signs on the entire block, thus not revealing what shards it validates. Makes sense? Because it's some anonymity, well, I don't know about anonymity, but some concealment. Specifically, when the validator receives a block and validates all the chunks, it either creates a message that attests that all the chunks in the shard the validator is assigned to are valid, without indicating in any way that what those shards are, okay, or a message that contains a proof of an invalid state transition if any trunk is invalid. So you're either just going to send, you receive a block and you validate all the trunks, and you either say that yes, it's all true, or this is a proof saying that this part of it's false. Okay, yeah. How to prevent validators from piggybacking on messages from other validators. And here for details, how to reward and punish validators should a successful invalid state transition challenge actually happen. Okay, cool. So, not Google. I said cool. Concealing the validators in Nightshade. So it's just saying how you have a bit mask on the left, 0010010, and that's going to tell you which validators to which shards to validate for. Yeah, it's your shard assignment, and you just sign on the entire block. So you have a bunch of validators all signing the block. They're signing that they think it's true with the blue and red thing. Anyways, commit reveal. One of the common problems with validators is that a validator can skip downloading the state and actually validating the chunks and blocks, and instead observe the network, see what other validators submit, and repeat their messages. So they don't have to spend as much network overhead or bandwidth, and they can just get the money and not worry about actually doing the work. See what other validators submit. Okay, a validator that follows the strategy doesn't provide any extra security to the network, but collects rewards. A common solution for this problem is for each validator to provide a proof that they actually validated the block, for example, by providing a unique trace of applying the state transition, but such proofs significantly increase the cost of validation. Agreed. Security is expensive. Let's see how they did it. Oh, with a commit reveal scheme. Very cool, very cool. Instead, we make the validators first commit to the validation result. So you commit to what you're saying the truth is, or proof of an invalid state. Yeah. Wait for a certain amount of period, and only then reveal the actual validation result, as shown in figure 25. So you have a full block, number one. In block 10, you have the commit for block 1, and then in block 20, you commit for block 10 and then reveal for block 1. So it's a common like in the blockchain to do commit reveal schemes in order to have some extra security so you can't game the system. It adds a little bit of extra overhead, um, but clearly not as much overhead as sorry, not as much overhead as every single validator submitting a proof back to the network in time to be accepted. Yeah, so still overhead, but not as much. The commit period doesn't intersect with the reveal period, and thus a lazy validator cannot copycat honest validators because it's hidden. Moreover, if a dishonest validator committed to a message that attests to the validity of the assigned chunks, and at least one chunk is invalid. So even if you attest to something and most of it seems correct because you only checked half of it, the information, and you're like, oh, that seems good enough. If even one chunk is wrong, then you're also going to get slashed. Because you're committing to that and it's going to get revealed later and you're going to get slashed. Once it is shown the chunk was invalid and the validator cannot avoid the slashing since it was shown, as we show in section 3.7.5, the only way to not get slashed in this situation is to present a message that contains a proof of the invalid state transition that matches the commit. So if you sign something saying that there's an invalid, if you sign an invalid state transition, you're going to get slashed. And the only way not to get slashed would be to submit the proof saying that, yes, it was invalid, it seems. But that doesn't really make sense. I think you still get slashed. But anyways, let's see what they said. 3.7.5, handling challenges. As discussed above, once a validator receives a block with an invalid chunk, they first produce a proof of the invalid state transition. See section 3.7.1. Then commit to such a proof. So they see something's not right. They say, okay, let's create a proof saying that, you know what, this is what it should be or whatever the proof is supposed to look like. And then they commit to the proof. After some period, reveal the challenge. And so they also, it's cool because it's like a hidden challenge as well, so no one else can copy your challenge because you're challenging. They gotta hide and then see that maybe they say there was the challenge, but they won't know what the challenge was until you reveal. So once the revealed challenge is included in a block, the following happens. So let's see. As discussed above, once a validator receives a block with an invalid chunk, they first prepare a proof of the invalid state transition. Then commit to such a proof, and after some period, reveal the challenge. Okay, wait, is that repeated? Sorry, am I reading it? Sorry. I feel like I just read the same thing twice, and I can't tell if I actually did or not. Anyways, all the state transitions that happen from the block containing the invalid chunk into the block in which they revealed is included get nullified. So if the challenge happens in block 110, and the proof challenge gets revealed in block 120, then all those 10 blocks they're nullified. The state before the block that includes the reveal challenge is considered to be the same as the state before the block that contained the invalid chunk. 2. Within a certain period of time, each validator must reveal their bit mask of the shards they validate. So each validator has to also help. Okay. Since the bit mask is created via VRF, if they were assigned to verify random functions, so just randomness, that they had the invalid state transition, they cannot avoid revealing it. So basically, the network makes them reveal if they have to. So if you're online, they'll make you reveal, I guess. Because the network knows, okay, any validator that fails to reveal a bit mask is assumed to be assigned to the shard. Any validator that fails to reveal, okay, so if you don't reveal the bit mask, they're going to assume you're malicious. So each validator that after such period is found to be assigned to the shard that did to commit to some validation result for the block containing the invalid chunk and that didn't reveal the proof of invalid state transition that corresponds to their commit is slashed. So they're saying if some data is incorrect and anyone votes on that data, we can just go back to the data, see who any validators that signed to it. Any validator that signed to it, give us your proof. If your proof included this wrong data, then you're fine, I guess. And if you didn't submit anything, you're a liar and you get slashed. Each validator gets a new shards assignment, and the new epoch is scheduled to start after some time sufficient for all the validators to download the state. I talk really loud, and I'm sure everyone can hear me everywhere. That's all right. As shown in Figure 26. Note that from the moment the validators reveal the shards they are assigned to until the new epoch starts, the security of the system is reduced since the shards assignment is revealed. Okay. Okay, let me look at that again. So when there's an actual challenge, so if there's a challenge, from the moment the validators reveal the shards they're assigned to until the new epoch starts, shard assignments are revealed. So someone can use a small slashable offense to get validators to reveal their shard assignments and potentially use that to kind of figure out how they want to attack the network and maybe continue doing this to kind of map out, or I don't know how that would work because it keeps changing with the VRF, but I don't know. The participants of the network need to keep it in mind while using the network during such periods. So yeah, if there's a challenge period, that's the period where you'd have less security. And then once the challenge period is over, you go back to that. As I don't know how long that challenge period is. I guess that would be the issue. Signature aggregation. For a system with hundreds of shards to operate securely, we want to have on the order of 10,000 or more validators. I wouldn't mind if the Mama J Foundation was validated for near. It'd be kind of cool. As discussed in section 3.1, we want each validator to publish a commit to a certain message and a signature on average once per block. Even if the commit messages were the same, aggregating such a BLS signature and validating it would have been prohibitively expensive. Okay. But naturally, the commit and review messages are not the same across validators, and thus we need some way to aggregate such messages as the signatures in a way that allows for fast validation later. Okay, let's see how they do it. I'm gonna drink some water. One second. I've had no oatmeal yet either, so I'm gonna try and get to that too before it gets cold. The specific approach we use is the following. Validators joining block producers. The block producers are known sometime before the epoch starts. Remember here the epochs are days, not a few seconds like in ETH2. Since they need some time to download the state before the epoch starts. So the block producers are downloading, not the entire state of the blockchain, but the entire state of the shards that they need to be producing the next block for, I'm pretty sure. Or the last block so that they can verify them and produce the next block. Each block producer has V validator slots. Validators submit off-chain proposals to the block producers to get included as one of their V validators. So off-chain, you go, hey, block producer, can I please validate for you? Can I please validate for you? So it's not like an on-chain transaction. I'm not sure how I feel about that. But anyways, if a block producer wishes to include a validator, they submit a transaction that contains the initial off-chain request from the validator and the block producer's signature that makes the validator join the block producer. Note that the validators assigned to the block producers do not necessarily validate the same shards that the block producer produces chunks for. So it's like a way to have a little walled garden. But when you let someone in, you don't have control of what they're validating for, which is kind of cool. Very interesting. Very interesting. And also it's kind of interesting because you put the onus on block producers to choose validators. So if there's a malicious validator in the mix, you also know, I would assume, which validator or which block producer accepted them into the community. Note that the validators assigned to the block producers do not necessarily validate the same shards that the block producer produces chunks for. If a validator applied to join multiple block producers, only the transaction from the first block producer will succeed. Okay, so if you have a validator, you can only join one block producer, but you will not necessarily validate the blocks a block producer produces. You'll validate random blocks. So that block producer is more like taking responsibility for you as a validator. Block producers collect commits. The block producer constantly collects the commits and reveal messages from the validators. So the block producer is also in charge of those validators and collecting those commit reveals messages that they're producing. Once a certain number of such messages are accumulated, the block producer computes a Merkle tree of these messages and sends to each validator the Merkle root and the Merkle path to their specific message. So that the message is smaller, I would assume. The validator validates the path because it's all, the only data you need is the path to yourself, to your own message. The validator validates the path and signs on the Merkle root. So they validate the path saying, okay, you know what? I checked the data. This is actually correct from the Merkle tree to myself. I'm signing on it. And now when you send it back, the block producer accumulates those signatures from all the different validators saying, yeah, it's true, yeah, it's true, yeah, it's true, yeah, it's true. And then the block producer sends that message. So that's a way just to keep the overhead of the validators down. And so the block producers have this huge overhead, but the validators only have to do is off-chain, so off-chain, they get onto a block producer, and then, yes, they have some on-chain work to do, but the block producer is doing a lot of the server architecture as well. So it's like a mix of you have a multiple, mixed topography here, I suppose, of nodes. So in Ethereum 2, you just have like one topography of nodes. Every node is the same. And here you have this these block producers and validators, and they're kind of mixed together in this cool way. And I think it's cool. I like it. I like it. I like it a lot. I like it a lot. Wait. Is that a DC net? Never mind. I'm gonna keep going. The block producer then accumulates the BLS signature on the Merkle, blah 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 blah. The block producer also signed on the validity of the multi-signature using a cheap ECDSA signature. If the multi-signature doesn't match the Merkle root submitted or the bit mask of the validator is participating, it is a slashable behavior. So yeah, if you do something wrong, you get slashed. When synchronizing the chain, a participant can choose to validate all the BLS signatures from the validators, which is extremely expensive since it involves aggregating validators' public keys. So you can validate everything, but it's expensive. So validators do have that choice, though, or only the ECDMA signatures from the block producers. So either you can trust the block producer or you can do it yourself, which I think is really cool. I really like that. Because Starkware has a similar off-chain layer 2 scaling solution. Not similar, I shouldn't even say that. But they have a system where you only need one honest party and you're into the system and blah, blah. But one thing I don't necessarily like is that you need to trust the block, the centralized nodes, I suppose, which is great. But I like a system where, okay, if I want to spend, maybe there's a certain period of time having a big event and I want to spend my own money to check my own signatures or my own proofs, I'd like to have that possibility. And it might never come up, but I think it's an important use case to have, or important attribute of the network. Okay, using on-chain transactions and Merkle proofs for challenges. It can be noted that there's no value in revealing messages from validators if no invalid state transition was detected. Only the messages that contain the actual proofs of invalid state transitions need to be revealed. That makes sense. And only for such, so basically all messages stay hidden until you get one of those commit. So you send all these messages, but you don't have to actually read them or do anything on them, which makes sense. And sorry. And then if you have one of those those commit reveal schemes, and then you reveal that, oh, you know what, back there something was slashable, something was wrong, then they'll open all those messages and see everything that's going on. And only for such messages, it needs to be shown that they match the prior commit. The message needs to be revealed for two purposes: to actually initiate the rollback of the chain to the moment before the invalidation condition, makes sense, and to prove that the validator didn't attempt to attest to the validity of the invalid chunk. Also makes sense. So the message is only there to prove that you're honest or that you're malicious. and to know what point to go back to. In each case, we will need to address two issues. Okay, a little more oatmeal, sorry. Okay. One, the actual commit was not included on chain. Only the Merkle root of the commit aggregated with other messages. The validator needs to use the the validator needs to use oops, I lost track of where it was. The Merkle path provided by the block producer and their original commit to prove that they committed to the challenge. Okay. It is possible that all the validators assigned to the shard with the invalid state condition happened to be assigned to corrupted block producers that are censoring them. And this is where I think these networks have a lot more issues. It's like if the block producers decide to be buttholes. Anyways, to get around it, we allow them to submit the reveals as a regular transaction on chain and bypass the aggregation. Very cool. So you can like basically tell on daddy block producer on chain, and unless a bunch of block producers are colluding against you, then the one or two or whatever block producers shouldn't be able to. And I wonder how many block producers you have on. I think there's quite a few, more than the 20 of US. I don't know how many it is though. The latter is only allowed for the proofs of invalid state transition, which are extremely rare. I mean, I don't know if we know it's extremely rare though, but anyways, and thus should not result in spamming the blocks. The final issue that needs to be addressed is that the block producers can choose not to participate in messages aggregation or intentionally censor particular validators. We make it economically disadvantageous by making the block producer reward proportional to the number of validators assigned to them. So you want as many validators as possible so you can get a higher block reward, and therefore, I guess it's harder to censor everyone, like I would assume. So we also note that since the block producers between epochs largely intersect, since it's always up to the top W participants with the highest stake, so people are fighting to become block producers, and then people are asking to become validators. Okay, the validators can largely stick to working with the same block producers and thus reduce the risk of getting assigned to a block producer that censored them in the past. So yeah, I wonder how easy it is to like if you join a block producer you don't like to leave a block producer and join another one. I'm assuming it's not too difficult, but I have to look into that stuff soon or eventually. 3.9 snapshots chain. Since the blocks on the main chain are produced fairly frequently, very frequently, downloading the full history might become expensive very quickly. Moreover, since every block contains a BLS signature of a large number of participants, just the aggregation of the public keys to check the signature might become prohibitively expensive as well. Finally, since in any foreseeable future Ethereum 1 will likely remain one of the most used blockchains, having a meaningful way to transfer assets from near to Ethereum is a requirement, and today verifying BLS signatures to ensure near blocks validity on Ethereum's side is not possible. Each block in the Nightshade, and there is a near Ethereum bridge now, so obviously this has been worked on, and all of this information, a lot of it is probably old or outdated, but this is kind of a background for me, and I want to build upon it as I learn more about near and more about Ethereum as well. Each block of the Nightshade main chain can optionally contain a Schnorr multi-signature with the header of the last block that included such a Schnorr multi-signature. We call such blocks snapshot blocks. The very first block of every epoch must be a snapshot block. While working on such a multi-signature, the block producers must also accumulate the BLS signatures of the validators on the last snapshot block and aggregate them the same way as described in section 3.8. Since the block producers set is constant throughout the epoch, validating only the first snapshot blocks each epoch is sufficient, assuming that at no point a large percentage of block producers and validators colluded and created a fork. And so we're assuming, again, epochs here are a few days. So, you have a few days of security between those epochs, I would assume, those snapshots. The first block of the epoch must contain information sufficient to compute the block producers and validators for the epoch. So basically, the first block, everyone will the block will do all this work, and the work isn't done again for the entire block, for the entire epoch. So maybe they need to add it to be doing halfway through, or every couple of days, or every day, or whatever. But this is how it is so far. Creating a Schnorr multi-signature is an interactive process, but since we only need it to perform it infrequently, no matter how efficient process will suffice. So saying, yeah, it's only every few days. So even if it's you have to go to your computer every few days and do it manually or whatever, not manually, but anyways, still, it's not something that should be that large of a deal if you're a professional block producer making a lot of money on this system. The Schnorr multi-signatures can be easily validated on Ethereum, which is very good, which means now you can start sending assets back and forth, waiting those 3 days, and the assets should be on Near or whatever. To sync with the Near chain, one only needs to download all of the snapshot blocks and confirm that the Schnorr signatures are correct, optionally also verifying the individual BLS signatures of the validators, and then only syncing main chain blocks from the last snapshot block. Very interesting. Conclusion. In this document, we discussed the approaches to building sharded blockchains and covered two major challenges with existing approaches, namely state validity and data availability. We then presented Nightshade, a sharding design that powers Near protocol. The design is a work in progress. If you have comments, questions, or feedback on this document, please go to this website. I'm sure I'll find myself there eventually. But yeah, that is it for this paper. I don't think that was an hour. I was pretty short. Yeah, 41 minutes. So that's it for that. If you found that interesting or whatnot, you should definitely read the paper yourself. I think that the beginning parts, chapters 1 and 2, about sharding basics and state availability, were actually pretty well written, pretty good papers. Personally, I think the YouTube series that they have on these ideas is pretty cool, and I'm excited to continue going through that. But next, I'm going to be going live, digging into Near as if I was a developer. I'm not really a developer. I do not like to code that much, but I think it will be fun to kind of go onto the homepage website and kind of just get started and kind of go through like a walkthrough. But yeah, hope everyone has a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoyed the video. But that's all.